The autumn of 1888 was a season of fear in London. The city was already holding its breath, haunted by the specter of Jack the Ripper in the East End. But as a cold, biting rain lashed against the windows of 221B, Baker Street, the true source of Sherlock Holmes's vexation was not the terror in the streets, but the suffocating tedium within our own rooms. He stood by the mantelpiece, not in his usual armchair, examining a single mud-stained lady's glove that a client had left behind that morning. The client, a flustered baroness, had claimed the glove was lost during a frantic search for a dropped brooch in Hyde Park. "Watson," Holmes said suddenly, breaking a long silence without turning around. "What do you make of the baroness's tale?" "A simple case of misfortune, I should think," I replied. She seemed quite distressed. "Distressed, yes, but not for the reasons she stated," Holmes countered, turning the delicate glove over in his long fingers. "Observe the mud. It is not the common, loamy soil of Hyde Park, but a darker, clay-heavy earth, speckled with fine cold dust. The type one finds near the railway lines at Paddington. The stitching on the index finger is slightly frayed, not from wear, but from being repeatedly snagged, perhaps on the rough wood of splintered fence. And inside, he used his forceps to extract a single, minuscule splinter. We find a trace of creosote, used to preserve railway sleepers. The Baroness was not searching for a brooch in the park. She was involved in a clandestine meeting near the railway lines, a meeting which involved a frantic climb over a fence, and the lie about the park was a clumsy attempt to conceal this fact from her husband. He tossed the glove onto the table with a sigh of profound disappointment. A trivial domestic drama, Watson, utterly devoid of any real intellectual meat. As if on cue, the sharp ring of the doorbell cut through the gloomy afternoon. A few moments later, Mrs. Hudson showed in Inspector Lestrade. His face was grayer and more careworn than usual, and he carried with him the chill of the rain and something far colder. "I need you, Holmes," he said, foregoing any pleasantries. "It's Sir Reginald Davenport, the retired judge, found dead an hour ago in his study." "Go on," Holmes said, a flicker of interest finally displacing his ennui. "It's the damnedest thing," Lestrade continued, his voice heavy with frustration. "A ghost couldn't have gotten in or out. The window was bolted, the door locked from the inside. The key was on his desk. The police surgeon is baffled. No weapon, no wound, save for a single, almost imperceptible puncture mark at the base of his skull. He suspects a powerful, fast-acting neurotoxin of unknown origin." And Holmes pressed, sensing there was more. "And this," Lestrade said, placing a photographic plate on the table. It was placed neatly beside the victim's hand. The photograph showed a single, perfect feather from a raven, its tip dipped in the victim's own blood as if it were an ink quill. Holmes leaned in, his eyes, no longer bored, now blazing with a fierce, analytical light. He stared at the image for a long moment. "Not a quill, Lestrade," he murmured, his voice a low, intense hum. "A message. The raven, a bird of ill omen and intellect. The blood, a personal, intimate touch. This is not the work of a common brute. This is a performance." He stood up, the triviality of the Baroness's glove forgotten, his entire being now focused on the grand, dark stage that had just been set. "Our killer is intelligent, precise, and worst of all, he is a theatrical artist who has just opened his grim play in the West End. The air in London has grown colder, Lestrade, and I know, with a chilling certainty, that this was only Act One. A week passed. The press, whipped into a frenzy by the bizarre nature of the Davenport murder, dubbed the unknown assailant the poet of death. Scotland Yard made no progress, and the trail went cold, lulling the city into a false sense of security. It was then that the killer struck again. The victim was Lord Ashworth, a wealthy industrialist notorious for his brutal union-busting tactics. He was found in his private box at the Royal Opera House during an intermission of Don Giovanni. He appeared to be merely asleep, slumped in his velvet chair, until an attendant noticed the unnatural pallor of his skin. The cause of death was the same, a powerful, unidentified neurotoxin, administered through a tiny puncture mark at the base of his skull. The box, which he occupied alone, had been guarded, its door never opened during the performance. And on the armrest of his chair, placed with the same chilling precision as before, lay the killer's signature, a single raven's feather, its tip stained crimson. Lestrade, now thoroughly panicked, returned to Baker Street. It's a pattern, Holmes. Two men of power, both with legions of enemies, both killed in seemingly impossible circumstances. How'd he do it? It's like he can walk through walls. Holmes, however, was focused on a different aspect of the crime. He had procured a list of every person who had sat in the boxes adjacent to Lord Ashworth's. He also had a detailed seating chart of the entire opera house for that evening. The killer's method of entry is a secondary problem, Lestrade, Holmes stated, his long fingers tracing lines across the seating chart. The primary question is one of selection. The Ripper kills randomly, driven by a savage impulse. Our man is different. He is choosing his victims with the care of a connoisseur. Sir Reginald Davenport, a man who dealt in the law. Lord Ashworth, a man who dealt in industry and wealth. There's a clear theme emerging. He is not killing people. He is killing symbols of the establishment. He stood and walked to his large map of London, upon which he had already marked the location of the first murder. He now carefully placed a second pin, marking the Royal Opera House. A judge in his study, a lord at the opera, he mused aloud. These are not just murders. They are pronouncements. Our poet is delivering a sermon, Lestrade, and he is writing it in blood. Holmes knew that to catch a predator, one must first understand its hunting methods. The how of the murders was a puzzle box of the highest order, and the key, he deduced, was the poison itself. No common assassin has access to a neurotoxin of such potency and subtlety. Watson, he declared one morning, amidst a chemical chaos of beakers and retorts in our sitting room. Aconite, ricin, cyanide, they all leave distinct traces, markers for any competent toxicologist. This poison, however, is an enigma. It kills swiftly, mimics a natural seizure, and then seems to vanish from the bloodstream. This suggests a highly complex organic compound, something not brewed in a back-alley laboratory, but cultivated. This line of reasoning sent Holmes on a deep dive into the arcane world of toxicology and botany. He spent 2 days buried in the library of the Royal College of Surgeons, poring over ancient herbals, modern chemical treatises, and obscure papers on South American tribal poisons. He returned to Baker Street late on the second night, his eyes alight with the fire of discovery. He carried a dusty, leather-bound volume under his arm. "I believe I have found our silent weapon, Watson," he announced, opening the book to a detailed illustration of a deceptively beautiful dark purple flower. "Behold, Aconitum silentium, the silent monk's hood, a theoretical, almost mythical, hybrid. For centuries, botanists have speculated that a specific cross-pollination of the common monk's hood with a rare Amazonian vine could produce an alkaloid of unparalleled toxicity, a poison that could be introduced into the bloodstream and break down completely within an hour, leaving no trace. But if it's mythical, I protested, how can the killer use it? Ah, but that is the crux of the matter," Holmes exclaimed. "It is mythical to the general scientific community. But according to this footnote," he pointed to a small, faded entry. "A single, successful specimen was cultivated 20 years ago at the Royal Botanic Gardens, under the care of a brilliant but disgraced botanist, a Dr. Alistair Blackwood." The name was a thunderclap. Dr. Alistair Blackwood had been dismissed from his prestigious post after a scandal involving reckless experiments and the alleged theft of dangerous plant specimens. He had vanished from the public eye, a man with a brilliant mind, a grievance against the establishment, and, it now appeared, the knowledge to create the perfect, untraceable poison. The ghost of a killer was beginning to take on a very solid and very dangerous form. Dr. Alistair Blackwood's name sent Holmes and me on a deep dive into the archives of London's scientific and academic communities. After hours spent wading through disciplinary records, Holmes requested an audience with the one man who would have handled Judge Davenport's old files. To understand the past, Holmes noted, We must first speak to its librarian. A short while later, a timid, bespectacled man was shown into the archive room. It was Arthur Penrose. He gave a slight, deferential bow, a gesture of meekness. Yet Holmes, who missed nothing, noted a subtle contradiction. For a man with the slight build of a clerk, his shoulders possessed a surprising, wiry strength beneath his cheap tweed jacket. "Mr. Penrose," Holmes began, "are you familiar with the disciplinary case of Dr. Alistair Blackwood?" "Yes, sir," Penrose replied, his voice soft. "Sir Reginald spoke of it on occasion. He considered it one of the most difficult." He paused, bringing a hand to his mouth to cover a slight cough. A classic gesture of concealment, Holmes noted subconsciously, but necessary decisions of his career. "We believe Blackwood is seeking revenge," Holmes stated, observing the clerk's reaction intently. "I'm not surprised," Penrose replied, shaking his head with an air of sadness. "After his dismissal, I understand he fell on very hard times. A true tragedy. Sir Reginald had many enemies, but an enemy with a mind like Blackwood's. That is a different threat altogether." The observation, while seemingly sympathetic, was remarkably astute for a junior clerk. "We need to know who is involved," Holmes pressed. "Of course," Penrose said, proving most helpful. He navigated the files with an impressive efficiency. "Here we are. The final notice of dismissal." He pushed the document across the table. 3 signatures: Sir Reginald Davenport, Lord Ashworth, and Dr. Alistair Finch. He recited the names of London's most powerful men smoothly, perhaps too smoothly, without a hint of hesitation. As Penrose pointed to Lord Ashworth's signature, Holmes observed a tiny, near-healed scratch, sharp as a paper cut, across the clerk's right index finger. Not an injury typical for a man of letters, Holmes thought. "Thank you, Mr. Penrose. You have been a great help," Holmes said. The clerk gave another slight bow and retreated, humble and nearly invisible. But this time his invisibility felt practiced, a perfectly worn mask. After Penrose had departed, I was entirely convinced. "It is settled then, Holmes. Blackwood is our man, and Dr. Finch is his next target. We must warn him at once." "Patience, Watson," Holmes cautioned, his gaze distant. "A river never flows in a single, straight line. There are always tributaries and undercurrents." Judge Davenport was a complex man. His enemies were not confined to his past. He turned to the door just as Penrose was about to leave. "Mr. Penrose, one moment more. Besides the Blackwood affair, was there any other matter vexing Sir Reginald recently? Anything at all, no matter how trivial it seemed?" Penrose paused at the door, putting on a show of deep concentration. "Vexing? Well, there was one thing, but I am certain it is of no consequence," he said, his voice laced with practiced hesitation. "A rather sordid high society affair. A gambler by the name of Jack Finney approached the judge, claiming that the marriage of Lady Beatrice Blackwood was fraudulent. He had some old parish register." "Lady Blackwood?" Holmes repeated, the coincidence of the name catching his attention. "Yes, a different Blackwood line entirely," Penrose clarified quickly. "Sir Reginald reviewed the document, but believed it a likely forgery. He told me that Finney was an unreliable scoundrel, and that Lady Beatrice was the unfortunate victim of a nasty blackmail attempt." The judge intended to dismiss the matter entirely the following day. Compared to the threat of a ruined genius like Dr. Blackwood, I assure you, this was nothing more than a minor annoyance. The clerk had done something incredibly clever. He had introduced the name of Lady Beatrice, but had simultaneously provided the perfect reason to dismiss her as a suspect. He had framed her as a victim and the judge as her protector, extinguishing any thought that she could be the perpetrator. "I see," Holmes said, his eyes never leaving Penrose. "Thank you again. You have provided a most useful context." When Penrose had finally gone, Holmes turned to me. "Now, Watson, we shall go and warn Dr. Finch. But let us keep the clerk's words in mind. All rivers have their undercurrents. The crucial question still plagued us: the method of injection. How did Blackwood administer his untraceable poison in seemingly impossible circumstances? A locked room, a guarded opera box. The delivery system must be as subtle as the poison itself. Holmes mused as our cab rattled through the rain-slicked streets. A conventional syringe is too clumsy, too obvious. The puncture mark is described as almost imperceptible. This suggests a needle of extraordinary fineness, perhaps something not of metal at all. He fell into a deep, concentrated silence, his mind sifting through his encyclopedic knowledge. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He ordered the cabman to change course, not towards Baker Street, but towards the Natural History Museum. We found our way to the entomology department, a vast hall of glass cases filled with insects from around the globe. Holmes bypassed the colorful butterflies and formidable beetles, heading straight for a small, unassuming display case in a dusty corner. The label read, "Insect Weaponry and Defense Mechanisms." He pointed to a specimen card displaying a large, black tropical insect that looked like a cross between a wasp and a mosquito. The accompanying text was in fine, academic print. "Behold, Watson," Holmes said, his voice a low, excited hum. "The Malaysian needle wasp. Its stinger is a marvel of natural engineering. A hollow, chitinous tube, finer than any man-made needle, and stronger than steel for its weight. It is designed to pierce the thick exoskeleton of a beetle and deliver venom with pinpoint precision. When it retracts, the entry point is all but invisible." "Good heavens, Holmes," I breathed. "You believe Blackwood is using an insect?" "Not the insect itself," he corrected, "but the principle. A man with Blackwood's genius, with access to a laboratory, could easily cultivate a toxin. But to weaponize it, he would turn to nature for inspiration. He has engineered a delivery device, Watson. A tiny, air-powered dart, no bigger than a grain of rice, tipped with a stinger fashioned from this wasp, or something very similar, propelled by a puff of compressed air from a concealed device, a hollowed-out walking stick, an umbrella, even a book. It would be silent, invisible in a crowded room, and utterly lethal. He doesn't need to be in the room, Watson. He only needs a clear line of sight and a few inches of exposed skin at the base of the skull." The sheer, diabolical ingenuity of the method was staggering. Blackwood wasn't a phantom who walked through walls. He was a sniper, and his bullet was the kiss of an insect. We now knew the how. All that remained was to prevent him from striking one last time that we arrived at the Royal College of Surgeons well before the lecture was due to begin. While I watched the main entrance, Holmes, having procured a set of building plans from a nervous clerk, slipped away to conduct his own, unique survey of the Grand Lecture Theater. He returned half an hour later, his face grim, but his eyes blazing with a focused intensity. "The theater is a death trap, Watson. A perfect killing field for a man armed with an air-power dart." He unrolled the plans on a nearby bench. "Dr. Finch will stand at the podium," he began, his finger tracing a line. "He will be illuminated by gaslight, a perfect stationary target. Now, observe the layout. The seating rises in steep tiers. An assassin in the upper rows would have a clear, downward trajectory to the base of Finch's skull. Too obvious. Too many witnesses. But," he continued, his finger moving to a less conspicuous part of the diagram, "look here. The theater is old. It was built with a primitive ventilation system. A series of brass grates, set flush with the floor in the upper gallery, connect to a maintenance crawlspace that runs behind the walls. And this crawlspace is accessible from a disused laboratory in the West Wing, a laboratory that was decommissioned right around the time Dr. Blackwood was dismissed." My blood ran cold. "You believe you will fire from within the walls?" "Precisely," Holmes confirmed. "He can remove one of the decorative grates, giving him a small, concealed firing port no bigger than a shilling. He will be in total darkness, invisible to the audience. He can take a shot, replace the grate, and retreat through the crawl space, vanishing before anyone even knows a crime has been committed. It is the ultimate locked room mystery, enacted before a live audience of 300. He then showed me a small, dark object he held in the palm of his hand. It was a shard of dried mud. "I found this near the entrance to the old laboratory. It is not common London mud, Watson. It is a specific clay, rich in peat. The kind one finds in boggy, marsh-like environments, such as the wetlands east of the city, where one might cultivate rare and unusual plants in seclusion. The final pieces were slotting into place. Blackwood had a hidden laboratory, a secret point of entry, and a perfect concealed vantage point. All we had to do now was wait for the ghost to appear. As 8 p.m. approached, the Grand Lecture Theatre filled with the cream of London's medical society. The air buzzed with intellectual chatter, a stark contrast to the silent, deadly drama Holmes and I knew was about to unfold. Inspector Lestrade, now a reluctant convert to Holmes's theory, had placed 2 of his best plainclothes officers in the upper gallery, their eyes nervously scanning the rows of esteemed physicians. "They are looking in the wrong place," Holmes whispered to me as we took our own seats near the back, affording us a clear view of the entire gallery. Blackwood is not among the audience. He is, for all intents and purposes, a part of the architecture. At precisely 8 o'clock, Dr. Alistair Finch strode to the podium, a figure of academic authority. The theater fell silent. As he began his oration, his voice echoing through the hall, I found my eyes drawn irresistibly to the row of decorative brass ventilation grates high up on the back wall of the gallery. They were in deep shadow, almost invisible. Was one of them the barrel of the gun? Holmes, however, was not looking at the grates. His gaze was fixed on a single, ornate gas lamp mounted on the wall directly above the grates. It cast a pool of yellow light downwards, but left the area of the grates themselves in relative darkness. The lecture droned on. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The tension was unbearable. I saw one of Lestrade's officers shift his weight, his attention clearly wavering. And then I saw it. A flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, not at the grates but in the gas lamp above them. For a split second, the flame within the glass housing seemed to dip and flutter, as if a faint draft had disturbed it. It was a detail so minor, so insignificant, that no one else would have noticed. But Holmes saw it. I felt him stiffen beside me. He leaned in, his voice a barely audible whisper in my ear. The crawl space is unlit. To aim his device in the darkness, he needs a momentary point of reference. He has just opened the grate and used a small, cupped match to illuminate his target. That is our signal, Watson. Now, as one, we rose and began to move, not with panicked haste, but with a swift, silent purpose, making our way up the tiered steps towards the gallery, our eyes locked on the spot where a ghost was preparing to pull an invisible trigger. Our sudden, purposeful movement was a stark disruption in the static reverence of the lecture hall. A few heads turned, brows furrowing in annoyance, but Dr. Finch, lost in the sound of his own oration, did not notice. Holmes led the way, his long strides eating up the distance to the upper gallery. "Lestrade," he hissed to the inspector as we passed him. "The West Wing. The old laboratory. Now." The inspector, startled but finally convinced, nodded and dispatched his second officer at a run. We reached the back wall of the gallery. The air here was noticeably cooler, a faint, musty draft emanating from the brasswork. Holmes did not hesitate. He pointed to the third grate from the left, the one directly beneath the gas lamp where the flame had flickered. "This one," he stated with absolute certainty. He produced a small, powerful lever from his coat pocket and wedged it into the edge of the grate. With a sharp, decisive movement, he pried it open. It came away with a groan of disused metal, revealing a dark, cavernous opening, a black mouth in the ornate wall. From within the darkness, there was a startled gasp, the clatter of something metallic hitting the floor, and the sound of frantic scrambling. Holmes, without a moment's hesitation, plunged into the crawl space after our quarry. I was right behind him, my heart pounding against my ribs. The crawl space was a claustrophobic, dust-choked tunnel, a labyrinth of pipes and structural beams. The only light was the faint glow from the lecture hall behind us. Ahead, we could hear our prey moving swiftly, his flight surprisingly sure-footed in the pitch darkness. He knew this hidden network intimately. We followed the sounds, stumbling over unseen obstacles, the dust catching in our throats. The chase was a blind, desperate affair. Then, ahead, A faint rectangle of gray light appeared, the door to the disused laboratory. Our quarry burst through it, and we followed, spilling out into a large, derelict room. Standing in the center of the room, silhouetted against a tall, grimy window, was a tall, gaunt figure. He was no longer running. He held a strange, tube-like device in his hand, and he was turning to face us, his eyes glittering in the gloom like those of a cornered animal. The ghost had been flushed from his machine. Dr. Alistair Blackwood, the poet of death, stood before us at last. Doctor Alistair Blackwood was a wreck of a man, a shadow of the brilliant academic he had once been. His clothes were worn, his face was gaunt and etched with the lines of a 20-year-long obsession. But his eyes still burned with a fierce, unrepentant intelligence. He held the air-powered dart gun not as a threat, but as a craftsman might hold a favored tool. "Holmes," he said, his voice a dry, rasping whisper, but clear and steady. "I should have known it would be you. The only intellect in this city worthy of the name." He did not seem afraid, merely resigned. "Your vendetta is over, Blackwood," Holmes stated, his voice echoing in the large, empty room. A strange, thin smile touched Blackwood's lips. "Vendetta? No, Mr. Holmes. Not vendetta. Justice. The wheels of true justice grind exceedingly slow, but they grind exceedingly fine. Davenport, Ashworth, Finch, they were not mere men. They were pillars of a corrupt temple, a temple of hypocrisy that preaches merit while rewarding mediocrity. They stole my life's work, my name, my future. They called my genius reckless. I merely returned the favor. By murdering them in cold blood, I interjected, horrified by his calm demeanor. He turned his burning gaze on me. Murder? Is it murder to crush a viper? Is it murder to prune a diseased branch? I did not kill them, doctor. I merely corrected a gross imbalance in the natural order of things. I was a god in my own garden, and they were the blight. He gestured around the derelict laboratory. In the corners, I could now see the signs of a secret life. Makeshift chemical apparatus, botanical presses, and several large, carefully tended terrariums from which a strange, dark foliage grew. His hidden sanctuary, his poison garden. "You are a brilliant man, Blackwood," Holmes conceded, his voice softening slightly, a note of academic respect in his tone. "The synthesis of the toxin, the design of the delivery system, it is the work of a master. But you allowed your artistry to descend into theatricality. The raven's feather, the dramatic staging, it was these flourishes, your pride, that ultimately betrayed you." "An artist must sign his work, Mr. Holmes," Blackwood replied, his smile returning. "It has been a lonely 20 years. I confess, I crave an audience capable of appreciating the finer details of my composition." Just then, the heavy tread of Lestrade and his men sounded in the corridor. The performance was, at last, truly over. With Dr. Alistair Blackwood in custody, a collective sigh of relief swept through London. The press lauded Holmes as the savior of the city, and Scotland Yard took full credit for the brilliantly executed trap. But as the public celebrated the end of the poet of death's reign of terror, Holmes himself grew increasingly withdrawn and contemplative. "The case is not closed, Watson," he declared one evening, a full week after Blackwood's arrest. He stood before the fireplace, rereading the official reports from the 3 murder scenes. "Not closed," I replied, astonished. "Good heavens, Holmes, the man confessed. He is a genius, yes, but a madman. What more is there to solve?" "There is a loose thread," Holmes insisted, his brow deeply furrowed. "A detail that does not fit the psychological portrait of our artist. Think, Watson. Blackwood is a man of supreme intellect, arrogance, and meticulous planning. His methods were flawless, his poison a work of genius. He is a narcissist who saw his crimes as a form of high art. And yet," he paused, tapping a line in the report from the very first murder, the death of Sir Reginald Davenport. "And yet, in his first and most personal crime, the one that set his entire plan in motion, he committed a glaring, almost clumsy error." "What error?" I asked, completely at a loss. "The locked room, Watson," Holmes exclaimed, a fire of frustration in his eyes. He left the door locked from the inside, with the key on the desk. He had to resort to the old, tired trick of using a piece of wire and string to turn the key in the lock from the outside through the keyhole. It is a common, almost vulgar, method, the work of a second-rate burglar, not a master strategist. It is beneath a man of his intellect. It is the one false note in his entire symphony of death. Why, in his most significant act of justice, would a man like Blackwood resort to such a crude, elementary trick? It does not fit, and because it does not fit, I cannot rest. The case that London considered solved was, in Holmes's mind, still deeply flawed. A single, nagging inconsistency was enough to tell him that the true and complete picture of the crimes had not yet been revealed. Holmes's intellectual disquiet proved to be prophetic. 2 days later, a letter arrived at Baker Street. The envelope was official, bearing the mark of Newgate Prison. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in the precise, elegant script of a seasoned academic. It was from Dr. Alistair Blackwood, written from the condemned cell. The letter read, "Mr. Holmes, they tell me my time is short, a prospect I face with scientific curiosity rather than fear. My work is done. My magnum opus is complete. However, the public narrative of my composition contains a flaw that offends my intellectual sensibilities. As you, and you alone, would appreciate, an artist cannot bear to have his work misinterpreted, even at the end. You were correct in your deductions regarding the murders of Lord Ashworth and Dr. Finch. They were my handiwork, executed precisely as you surmised. They were the final, triumphant stanzas of my poem. But the first stanza, the death of Sir Reginald Davenport, the one that launched my career and for which I am most lauded, was not mine. I did not kill Judge Davenport. When I arrived at his study that evening, intending to administer my justice, I found him already dead, precisely as the police later discovered him. The door was locked from the inside. The crimson quill was already in place. Someone else, it appears, shared my intellectual framework. Someone else began the poem that I would go on to finish. I confess, this unknown collaborator has been the one true mystery that has occupied my thoughts in this final chapter. Consider this not a confession, but a final correction from one academic to another. Do with it what you will. Yours in intellectual honesty, Dr. Alistair Blackwood. I stared at the letter, utterly dumbfounded. Holmes, this is impossible. Is he mad? Is it a trick? Holmes, however, read the letter with a grim, almost solemn satisfaction. It is not a trick, Watson, and he is no more mad now than he was before. This is the truth. It is the missing piece, the solution to the one detail that has plagued me. He stood, his eyes blazing with a renewed and terrible energy. The clumsy, locked-room trick at the Davenport murder. It was not Blackwood's work because it lacked his elegance, his genius. Blackwood did not commit the first murder. He was a copycat of his own would-be crime. The case had not ended. It had been turned completely on its head. We had caught the serial killer, but the original murderer, the true poet of death, was still at large. With Dr. Alistair Blackwood's capture, a wave of relief washed over London. The press hailed Holmes as a hero, and Scotland Yard took its bows. Yet, in the quiet sanctum of 221B, Baker Street, Holmes was far from satisfied. A profound intellectual disquiet had settled upon him. The case is not closed. Watson, he insisted one evening, his brow furrowed in deep concentration as he stared into the fire. It cannot be. There is a fundamental flaw in the composition, a discordant note that ruins the entire symphony. What note? I asked, bewildered. Blackwood fits the profile perfectly. His confession, though selective, confirms his guilt. His guilt in 2 murders, yes, Holmes conceded, but not the first. The locked room of the judge's home. The clumsy, almost vulgar, trick of turning the key from the outside. It is the work of a common housebreaker, not a man of Blackwood's supreme intellect and theatrical pride. It does not fit his character. It is an artistic forgery. His words prove prophetic. 2 days later, a letter arrived, bearing the grim seal of Newgate Prison. It was from Blackwood, written from the condemned cell. He stated, with the cold pride of a scholar correcting a flawed text, that while he proudly claimed responsibility for the deaths of Ashworth and Finch, the murder of Judge Davenport was not his work. He wrote, "I arrived that evening to administer my own brand of justice, only to find my work already done for me. The door was locked, the quill in place. Someone else, it seems, began the poem that I would go on to finish. Consider this a final footnote for the historical record." Holmes lowered the letter, his eyes blazing with a fierce, vindicated light. "This is it, Watson. The confirmation, the thread that unravels the entire tapestry. We have caught the serial killer, but the original murderer, the true architect of this entire affair, is still at large. Then it must be Lady Beatrice." I concluded immediately, my mind racing back to the conversation we'd had weeks ago in the archive room. It is the only other logical possibility. The clerk, Penrose, told us himself. She was being blackmailed by that gambler, Finney. The judge had the evidence that could ruin her, destroy her name, and strip her of her fortune. Her motive is as clear as day. I began to pace, the theory taking shape with satisfying clarity. Think of it, Holmes. Desperate, she learns of the disgraced Dr. Blackwood and his burning hatred for the judge. A perfect convergence of interests. She seeks him out, offers him the funds he so desperately needs to enact his larger revenge, on one condition: that he first eliminates her problem. She provides the target, he provides the method. It explains everything. I looked to Holmes, expecting a nod of agreement, a shared sense of intellectual victory. He had been staring into the fire, listening intently, his face shrouded in shadow. A beautiful, villainous widow with a dark secret, he mused, his voice a low, thoughtful hum. It is a compelling narrative, Watson. It is almost perfect. He spoke the word perfect with a strange, almost disdainful inflection, as if its very flawlessness was its greatest flaw. It ties up all the loose ends in a neat, elegant bow. He continued, still not looking at me. Perhaps too neat. The machinations of true crime are rarely so tidy. They are often born of a far more mundane, more pathetic sort of desperation. Before we pay a visit to the formidable Lady Beatrice, permit me a moment of quiet reflection. There is a small, insignificant cog in this grand machine that feels entirely out of place. And with that, he sank deep into his armchair, closed his eyes, and the world outside, with its simple, elegant solutions, ceased to exist for him. I watched in silence as Holmes retreated into his mind palace. The vast, ordered archive of every fact, every glance, every intonation he had ever observed. He was no longer a man in a sitting room, but a ghost walking the corridors of his own immense memory. In his mind, he first revisited the scene of the crime, not the physical photographs, but the perfect mental reconstruction. He saw the overturned wastebasket, the slightly ajar drawer. These pointed to a frantic search, a fact that implicated Lady Beatrice. It fit. It was a solid, logical deduction. But then he moved to another wing of his palace, the one containing our first interview in the dusty archive room. He conjured the image of the law clerk, Arthur Penrose, not as a simple witness, but as the central figure. He replayed our entire conversation, and this time he saw not the helpful clerk, but the masterful actor beneath. He saw the man's hands, how his fingers, though seemingly delicate, had the faint telltale ink stains of a clerk, but also a single, hard callus on the thumb, the kind one gets from repetitive, forceful work, like using a tool. He saw the man's shoes, impeccably polished, yet the soles were worn in a peculiar way, suggesting long hours of standing and pacing, a nervous energy not befitting a man who merely sits. He then replayed Penrose's words, and they were no longer helpful, but insidious. The clerk had been quick to label the informant, Jack Finney, as a scoundrel and a gambler. How did a lowly clerk know so much about the personal character of a man who had only visited the judge once? Penrose had also described the missing marriage certificate with a startling clarity, as if he had studied it himself, not merely filed it away. He had not just presented a theory about Lady Beatrice. He had expertly crafted and sold it to us. And then, the final, crucial memory clicked into place with the force of a thunderclap. Holmes recalled the initial police report, a detail he had skimmed and dismissed at the time. The judge's body had been found by the first person to arrive at the office in the morning. That person was Arthur Penrose. He was the one who discovered the body. He was the one who controlled the scene before the police arrived. He was the one who established the foundational narrative of a locked-room mystery. The invisible man, the timid, helpful clerk who had been there all along, suddenly stepped out from the shadows of Holmes's memory into the blinding spotlight of suspicion. The unaccounted-for cog had found its place, not in the clock he was building, but in a different, far more sinister machine. "Watson," Holmes said, his eyes snapping open, blazing with a terrifying new understanding. "We have been played like a fiddle. Our helpful witness is not a witness at all. He is the architect, and I now know why. But Holmes, the motive," I protested, my mind struggling to keep pace with his lightning-fast reversal. "Penrose has no grand inheritance to protect. Why would he conceive such a monstrous plot?" "You are looking for the wrong motive, Watson," Holmes declared, already grabbing his coat and striding towards the door. "Penrose did not kill to protect a fortune. He killed to protect a fraud. We are returning to the law chambers. There's one final document I must see." We arrived to find Arthur Penrose at his desk, diligently archiving his late master's papers. He looked up, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of pure, cold panic crossed his face at our unexpected return, before being instantly suppressed by his usual mask of meekness. "Mr. Penrose," Holmes began, his voice dangerously calm, "I have been reviewing the judge's private financial ledgers. A man of his stature deals with vast sums. Yet, over the past year, I have noted a series of small, almost untraceable discrepancies. Minor sums, miscategorized, transfer between accounts with the meticulous skill of a man slowly, patiently siphoning funds. The work of a man who knows the system from the inside out. Your work." Penrose went deathly pale. That's a ludicrous accusation." "Is it?" Holmes countered, his voice turning to steel. "The gambler, Jack Finney, did not just bring a marriage certificate to the judge. A man like that, a bottom feeder, would smell weakness anywhere. He discovered your embezzlement, didn't he? He threatened to expose you. The judge was not investigating Lady Beatrice. He was on the verge of investigating you. The entire, intricate web was now laid bare. You had to silence both men," Holmes continued, as the heavy tread of Lestrade's men, summoned by Holmes, sounded in the corridor. "You killed Finney, but that still left the judge, who held Finney's evidence and was growing suspicious. You needed a plan, a scapegoat. And in the archives, you found the perfect one, the ghost of Alistair Blackwood. It was a masterstroke of manipulation," Holmes concluded, his voice a low, damning whisper. "You sought out the disgraced doctor. You funded his research with the money you had stolen. You directed his 20-year-old rage towards your own immediate problem. You used his genius to commit your murder, performed the clumsy locked room, trick yourself to differentiate the crime, and then found the body, playing the part of the grieving clerk to perfection, all while masterfully pointing us towards the flawless red herring of Lady Beatrice. You are not just a murderer and an embezzler, Mr. Penrose. You are a puppet master of the highest order." Arthur Penrose, the quiet, invisible man, slumped in his chair, his face a mask of utter defeat. He had orchestrated a reign of terror, manipulated a genius, and misled the finest detective in the world, all to protect his own pathetic, grubby secret. He was the true first author of the poem, a poet not of grand vengeance, but of quiet, desperate greed. The case of the Crimson Quill was finally and truly closed. The gaslight cast long, dancing shadows across our familiar sitting room at 221B Baker Street. The case of the Crimson Quill was finally over, and a fragile sense of peace had returned to London. I was tidying the papers on our table when my hand brushed against the single, mud-stained lady's glove that had served as the prelude to the entire affair. Holmes, I began, a piece of news I'd heard at my club earlier that day coming to mind. A curious word reached me today concerning that Baroness. The talk is that her husband, the Baron, has somehow discovered the truth of her clandestine journey. They say he has initiated divorce proceedings this very morning. Holmes, who had been staring thoughtfully into the fire, turned to me, his expression unreadable. Truth, my dear Watson, is a scalpel. In the hands of a surgeon, it can heal. But sometimes, it simply reveals a sickness that is already too far gone. He spoke with a certain finality, a grim acknowledgement of the ripples that spread from even his most trivial deductions. A heavy silence settled over the room, filled with the weight of a shattered marriage. It was broken moments later by the sharp, welcome ring of the doorbell. Mrs. Hudson entered, carrying a thick vellum envelope on a silver tray. It was from a firm of solicitors. Holmes took it, his demeanor shifting instantly. The weariness in his eyes vanished, replaced by the familiar, predatory glint of an intellect stirring to life. He scanned the contents, and a rare, thin smile touched his lips. He handed the letter to me, and I read of the impossible death of Mr. Alistair Blackwood, found in a vault sealed from the inside. Another Blackwood. I breathed, my mind reeling. In a vault? How is that even possible? Holmes was already on his feet, reaching for his traveling coat. The somber reality of the Baron's divorce now cast aside, replaced by the exhilarating thrill of a new, perfectly contained puzzle. An excellent question, Watson, he declared, his voice ringing with renewed vigor. While Penrose showed us the danger of a lock on the human heart, it seems we are now confronted with a rather more literal and fascinating problem. He paused at the door, turning to me with that iconic, hawk-like intensity. The game, my dear fellow, is afoot once more,